Oh, hello Dragonfly Swarm. Is Ganyu still relevant? She's finally coming back for her second rerun, and weirdly enough, her rerun has been placed smack in the middle of Sumeru's release, wherein an entirely new meta has nudged its way into the game. And as such, a lot has changed with Ganyu and her relevance to the game, and even since before Sumeru, we've seen minor shifts in the popularity of top characters like Ganyu for many reasons. But I figured this warranted a discussion and an analysis on what you can expect from Ganyu as of the 3.0 update, regarding not only her established playstyles and gear, but also newer playstyles that she's only just gained access to thanks to 3.0's release. Slight disclaimer though, this isn't really a should you pull video, it's more of a discussion and an objective look at everything Ganyu has to offer, as well as the drawbacks Ganyu will impose when you're playing her in 3.0 Genshin Impact. So before we start, I want to point out that I stream multiple days a week on Twitch if you want to stop by sometime and say hello, but now let's kick off this discussion by talking about Ganyu's strengths and weaknesses as a character. Obviously she's strong. Ganyu has some of the highest consistent damage potential in the entire game, and as much as having expensive teammates and gear does dramatically elevate that statement, the beautiful thing about Ganyu is that it really doesn't take much investment at all to make her strong. Through the use of multiple different playstyles such as freeze teams, melt teams, and sub DPS, Ganyu can output very high cryo DPS per rotation, and generally speaking, each of those teams come with their own pros and cons. But for example, with freeze teams, the value comes from the very high crit value Ganyu can utilize from this team style, as well as the safety of having your enemies constantly frozen. With melt teams, she trades safety and practicality for extremely high damage ceilings, and this playstyle allows her to branch out as not just a horde shredder but also a boss shredder, excelling in single target DPS. And then there's a multitude of teams she can slot into as a sub DPS and support, but the general idea is that as powerful as Ganyu is, she's also quite versatile, and I think that gets overshadowed a lot since most people I know associate her with freeze teams. I don't know why, but it's also worth mentioning that within the topic of her freeze teams, she's found quite a bit of success in the new bloom teams that have been introduced to us since 3.0's release, which I will discuss more in detail a bit later. So, at a baseline, Ganyu's access to a multitude of teams with multiple different playstyles has played a big role in her popularity, and because of her nature as a cryo character with easy access to crit rate, she doesn't even need that much investment to come into her strength, in freeze teams at least. But that isn't necessarily to say that Ganyu is the be-all end-all character of Genshin Impact, because she does come with drawbacks, some of which have only just recently begun to pop up because of what some people call power creep, but that's a trigger word, so let me elaborate. Firstly, Ganyu innately is a very vulnerable character. As a main DPS, her goal is to use charged attacks, which as a bow user makes her a sitting duck, and even with freeze teams where her enemies are constantly frozen, there is no guarantee that you won't occasionally be whacked out of her charged attack animation, which can result in a pretty big damage loss per rotation. Thus, in general, she relies quite heavily on shielders, especially in teams that don't utilize freeze, such as, for example, melt teams. But even beyond that, as strong as Ganyu is, a very large chunk of her damage potential is locked behind having characters like Venti and Mona on freeze teams, and characters like Zhongli and or Kazuha in melt teams. Thus, it's a bit contradictory of me to say, but as much as she does have great potential with mid-investment, Ganyu's high investment potential is notably larger and is quite a bit more expensive to bring to your account. I do want to reiterate though that this does not at all mean she isn't capable of being a powerful, but I had to clear my throat. This doesn't mean she's not capable of being a powerful DPS character without spending ungodly amounts of money for her. But as for Ganyu's supportive-ish playstyles, most of the value you're going to get out of playing her as a support comes from her taunt, her high off-field cryo damage, great and consistent cryo application, plus the cryo damage bonus her burst field grants to the active character, all of which things help her to flex as a surprisingly powerful support and sub DPS, but the downside is that this technically comes as an opportunity cost because she won't be utilizing her powerful charged attacks, which are, technically her bread and butter. Whether or not that's an issue for you is for you to decide. One of the biggest issues with Ganyu recently though is how Genshin's changing environment has kinda overshadowed her value. A lot of players have been talking since Inazuma came out about how much less impactful and dominant she feels because of newer enemies and different content being released that mitigated the value she brings to the table. The earliest examples of this were when enemies such as Kairagi came into the game, becoming a very common enemy to fight in and outside of the Spiral Abyss, and Ganyu hates them. They jump around a lot, and they have a second phase in which they're completely immune to crowd control such as freeze, rendering freeze Ganyu quite weak against them if they manage to reach this second phase. Beyond that though, unlike Spiral Abyss in early Genshin Impact days, Spiral Abyss nowadays hosts quite a number of bosses, even further mitigating the value of freeze Ganyu, which for context is her most popular playstyle for its ease of use and value. But to be fair, this issue seems to have faded away just a little bit, because with our first wave of the Sumeru Spiral Abyss, the entire first half of floor 12 features enemies that are very much susceptible to freeze, which is a great thing for both freeze Ganyu and fridge team sub DPS Ganyu. And so, speaking of changing environment, with the release of Sumeru, Ganyu has seen a number of interesting changes through the introduction of the Dendro element, and with the newfound emphasis on elemental mastery. I say that because it seems a lot of characters benefit from EM recently, plus Dendro Resonance grants EM, plus a lot of the new gear in the game grants EM, you get the point. So what does this all mean for Ganyu, a character who can't even react with Dendro at all? Well, weirdly enough, Sumeru seems to have helped Ganyu lean quite a bit heavier into her role as a melt DPS and or her role as a sub DPS / support inside of the new Bloom teams. In regards to melt DPS lifestyle, it does require quite a bit more investment than something like Freeze Ganyu would, but it has received some indirect buffs recently because of not only the new Hunter's Path bow, which I believe has a higher damage ceiling in melt teams than Amos bow, but also with the new Sapwood blade that Bennett can use to help significantly increase Ganyu's elemental mastery for these teams. And in terms of fridge teams, the reason Cryo units are so valuable is because not only do they freeze enemies in place so they can't walk away from Bloom seeds before they explode, but they also cause Hydro application to have a harder time burning through Dendro auras, which is a good thing because it means you'll get more Bloom reactions. The problem here is that this team kinda is restricted to the same drawbacks as a regular freeze team in that they can be a bit tedious to set up and they require you to fight enemies in groups for maximum damage, especially with Ganyu's burst in mind. Additionally, the team itself is by no means the strongest in the game, and you'll generally get more value out of it by slotting a different Cryo character such as Rosaria, because then you can slot Ganyu elsewhere for a more impactful role. Nonetheless, Ganyu is very strong in this team style because of her constant Cryo application and very high multi-target damage, so it's not unreasonable to bring her up. But regarding other Cryo units being able to replace her, that brings me to another point I think a lot of players dwell on in regards to Ganyu's viability, which is how replaceable is she? Well, before I get to the big and obvious Cryo unit that people like to talk about, let's first discuss how replaceable Ganyu is in Bloom teams, which my answer is a resounding yes, she is quite replaceable. Technically, she does have the highest damage potential of any Cryo unit for fridge teams, so she'll provide quite a lot to the team, but there is a lot more value to be had by letting a cheaper and similarly effective character fill that role, such as Rosaria, who's very good at acting as an energy battery for herself on top of being able to apply almost constant Cryo application and decent damage. Characters like Kaya can also provide this kind of value to a similar degree, and he's completely free, and thus as good as Ganyu is in fridge teams despite her relatively tedious energy issues, she's not irreplaceable and invaluable, so I personally wouldn't pull for her just for Dendro teams. Alright, we'll talk about Ayaka. It's kinda difficult to quantify who's better because this is a subjective topic no matter how you look at it. Both Ayaka and Ganyu are some of the strongest DPS units in the game, but it is important to note that they're strong for relatively kinda sorta different reasons. Ayaka is a character that has the benefit of being extremely practical to play, especially in regards to Genshin's modern environment. She excels against heavy and large enemies and still performs extremely well in AoE situations, and also she is extremely versatile with team building. I keep saying extremely. Ganyu, on the other hand, is more difficult to set up for and generally follows stricter team comping guidelines because of her dependence on survivability and her typical desire to be on the field for longer periods of time. But differences in practicality, as I said, are subjective. The real issue is that on top of being more practical, Ayaka's damage ceiling reaches very competitively with Ganyu's, which is one of a few reasons why she has quite noticeably overshadowed Ganyu since her release. It isn't necessarily that Ayaka is strictly better than Ganyu, because both of them have their moments above the other, it's just that Ayaka is, as I said, a more practical character to play, with very similar damage output to Ganyu. What I will say though, is that Ganyu fills quite a few roles that Ayaka cannot slot into as effectively. For example, as a Cryo support and even as a Cryo sub DPS in some scenarios, which brings me to my personal take on this hot debate. If you're strictly looking for a Cryo main DPS, Ayaka might be more enjoyable for you, as is the case with a lot of players nowadays it seems, but if you're open to a more difficult gameplay experience for the benefit of being able to slot her into a large handful of roles, you might find Ganyu a bit more appealing and valuable. While Ganyu is definitely not the be-all end-all Cryo character of Genshin Impact anymore, her value hasn't diminished at all. It's just that you have other options now if those other options entice you more. So in regards to Ganyu's relevance as a 3.0 Genshin Impact, of course she's still relevant, and in fact she's been enjoying a bit more relevance thanks to the new doors that are being opened for her with Sumeru. You shouldn't feel obligated to pull for her under any circumstances, but if you do, you'll be able to slot her into quite a handful of teams with quite a range of different playstyles, so do with that what you will, because that's about all I can say without accidentally stating that I like Ayaka more than Ganyu. I mean, what? Yeah, I said it. If you plan on fighting me about that, first like and subscribe so I can pay for my medical bills after the fight. Oh, and also follow me on Twitch, because I stream multiple days a week and it would be amazing to see you there. My community is super welcoming and they don't troll at all. Yeah. Anyways, I'm gonna go work on the Ganyu guide. Or should it be a Ganyu team guide? I don't know, we'll see.